Hello. Welcome, welcome. I'm Annie Moyer. This is Sun and Moon Yoga. We're here tonight to share some wisdom and to meditate, find some quiet in the mind in the midst of a very heavy world right now. Glad you're here. Chat in, say hello. And welcome to you in the room. Let's start with some quiet. Take some breaths and bring your awareness to your ground and get comfortable. Feel the support of whatever is holding you in your seat right now, and connect your sense of place to that seat, your sense of positioning on the earth in this moment, whatever is holding you safely and steadily. And maybe notice whatever part of your physical form is making clear contact with the ground or whatever is sitting between you and the ground. Whatever structures are there that are providing you a safe and steady anchor. And bring your awareness to your breath and watch as it arrives and fills your lungs and gets referenced and messaged out through the rest of your body. And then notice as the breath leaves upon exhale, as the body releases, lets go, gently softens. Can you sense areas in the body that are more or less willing to receive breath? And are there similar or different places in the body that are more or less willing to let go? Notice the rate and depth of your breath. Is there a natural inclination to deepen it upon bringing attention there? Is there a natural inclination to slow it down upon bringing awareness there? And that's not to say that a slow slower or deeper breath is necessarily appropriate at any given particular moment. What is always appropriate and useful is the awareness of it. So bring awareness. Let the next breath arrive unencumbered and well invited. And then let that same breath go, unencumbered, gently and willingly, to make room for the next. Notice as thoughts creep in, be a natural observer. Be curious about the nature of those thoughts. Recognize them. Allow them to show up. You might be interested in what they have to tell you. And if you don't like what those thoughts are telling you, make room in your heart for easy, compassionate presence. And then let the next exhale take you to the next moment that's fresh, new canvas or fertile ground for another breath, for another opportunity to be curious about the next thought that inevitably will show up. And if the silence scares you, if the silence feels too much or too unfamiliar, fill it with your observations of this very moment, of this breath, of these sensations, of this ground underneath you, of this spine righting itself and rising up tall. We don't have to have inner silence to have inner peace. We just need to have a little bit more wisdom about what the noise is all about. For the next few breaths, stay close to the experience, as close as you possibly can, to the rise of the inhale, to the fall of the exhale, and to the sensation that they bring up. And then awaken to this new moment and to the space around you. Wriggle your body a little bit. Switch positions if that feels appropriate or useful in any way. And once again, welcome. Tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about Baruch Spinoza, 17th century philosopher whose main job, his day job, was to grind down glass and make lenses that were used for microscopes and telescopes. He's not famous for that. He's famous for his thoughts and his words and his perspectives on the world. And the perspective, I believe, that he must have had in considering his work with his hands in making these lenses that were used to see literally both the minute and the magnificent, seems to have informed his view of the world. And his view of the world was that there was no difference between the minute and the magnificent, and that God, oneself, was in all things and all things part of God. That this imaginary line that had been drawn in the minds of men, distinguishing the high and mighty and the mere mortal, was a figment of imagination, as much as anything unseen could be a figment of the imagination. Spinoza believed that divinity dwelled in the smallest of what could be seen with the naked eye and in the largest of what is absolutely unseen. So take air, for an example, as a manifestation of some creation force, being no different than people or insects or mountain ranges or love or any feeling as a manifestation of that same creation force, that all that exists is part of the same thing. Spinoza happened to have come from, oh, my camera got really blurry for a minute. Hang on, let me see if I can fix this. I'm going to cover it for a second and uncover it. That's what we do. Okay. Spinoza happened to have come from a family of Jewish refugees. Interestingly enough, they fled Spain and Portugal and arrived in the Netherlands. And Spinoza himself ran into trouble because his views within his own religious tradition were seen as heretical. And formal Judaism wanted no part of this idea that we were just small gods walking around. And so he was banned from his Jewish faith tradition by the powers that be in the temple. And he suffered as a result. He was scorned, he was admonished, he was ostracized. It was dangerous at the time to have these radical thoughts, and one might say it's still dangerous to have radical thoughts. But nevertheless, he was subjected to great harm. In fact, somebody tried to attack him once with a knife, and he was running away from them, and they cut a slice through his cloak. And he always wore that same cloak, as the story goes, as a reminder of his mortality and of the strength of his convictions. So what I want to offer now is just a short meditation on, I'm going to say a little bit more about this viewpoint of the world, but for now, a little short meditation on this idea of the seen and the unseen. So if you can consider for a moment all of your immediate surroundings, everything that you can actually see, and everything that, even though you can't see inside you, that you know is there, the organs of your body, for example, and maybe even the breath that infuses the organs and the blood that runs through and nourishes everything inside. All of that, take it in. Everything that you can see in your immediate surroundings, everything inside of you that you understand is there, but you can't see. And notice that as you sit and breathe and contemplate these seen and unseen aspects of your immediate surroundings, your immediate personhood and aliveness, that in some ways, it doesn't matter if you can see it or not see it. You can see the floor that you're sitting on, but you can't see the earth that holds it up. You can see your skin, but you can't see the the blood and the bones underneath that fluff up the skin and then create the shape of you. You can feel your breath arriving, but you can't see it. And yet we don't doubt for a moment that all of these things are part of who we are and how we live on a moment by moment basis. So just breathing in an awareness that seeing is not everything. We can't see joy, but we feel it. We know it when we know it. And if you were to be the sort who measures things, who makes lists and grapples with the world in those sorts of tangible ways, if you're a scorekeeper of sorts, then you'll quickly deduce that the unseen wins. There is more of that than the seen. And in Spinoza's view, we are both. We are that which is seen, and we are those who see. So as we breathe in this air that is invisible and also absolutely crucial to our livelihood, as this life force and this creation force surges through us, we understand that things are at once demonstrable and measurable by the number of breaths that we could count in any minute, but also immeasurable and unconceivably vast. And when the vastness becomes overwhelming or daunting or too much to contemplate, we come back to this moment, to the next breath, to the feeling of steady, manifested matter around us. understandably, to consider the vastness of space and all that's unseen can become overwhelming, even as we understand conceptually that there is so much that's invisible, so much of the universe exists, much of it, most of it exists in black holes. And so at the same time as feeling overwhelming to contemplate this, it might also feel like, well, then it's not even worth our time because it's not really part of us or meaningful in any concrete way. But this is a really limiting way of looking at the world and considering the potential and the majesty of one lifetime. And I believe that that was part of what Spinoza was getting at, is that each one of us has this majestic potential as much as any God we could conjure. And for the next few breaths, perhaps you can imagine that the inhale belongs to the vastness, the majestic, the magnificent, and you're bringing all of that into where it lives anyway. And that the exhale lands you right here in the minute, in the moment, in the material world, where we have choices about how we can protect and nurture ourselves and each other and our planet and our realities. Inhaling the majestic, exhaling the minute. Inhaling the remnants of every star that ever lived, which in a way, in fact, we do. And then exhaling this very particular moment, which in itself is perhaps miraculous. And gently bring your awareness back to this new moment, this new now. Bring some gentle movement to reorient your body in space. So the commentary on Spinoza remarks how his philosophy was very much in line with Vedanta philosophy, which is one of the origins of yogic and in many ways Buddhist principles. Vedanta was a period of time that was the precursor to the organized system of yoga that we see first compiled at the beginning of the Common Era. And sometime in the last few hundred years before the Common Era, in that final millennium BCE, this Vedantic philosophy that Spinoza mirrors is happening at the same time as a vast awakening across the globe, where we have the Upanishads, the mystical treatises on the meaning of the universe in the East, to the Greek epics in the West, this awakening sweeping the globe all at the same time. And then, fast forward another millennium and a half, we have Spinoza echoing these same ideas. And there is no evidence actually that he was familiar with it or that he had read any of these sacred texts. But his systems of thought and belief are not really any different. And so I love when these overlaps occur, because it speaks to the universality of these ideas. Spinoza said, God is in the indwelling and not in the transient of all things. God is indwelling, not fleeting. And we so often flip it in our minds. We think that God is fleeting or floating or both. And that we have this somehow magical permanence about ourselves, even though we know intellectually that that's not true. Mortality is a funny thing that way. Albert Einstein was asked, "What God do you believe in?" And his answer was, "I believe in Spinoza's God." Because Einstein could see God in the workings of matter. He could see God in the particles and the waves of the world. The Yoga Sutras, this formal compilation of teachings that we find in the first few hundred years of the Common Era, reference that the practice of a balanced and a settled mind state is one that breaks the veil of illusion. And that illusion is the one of separateness. That veil is the thing that we believe that obscures our understanding or our perspective of the world, that makes us think that we are special and different than what seems to be ephemeral and floating, perhaps with a white beard sitting on a cloud. And that really this is just our own creation of a veil that differentiates, when there is really no such thing, according to this philosophy and according to Spinoza's way of looking at things too. Another way of describing this practice of settling the mind state so much that we can take in the magnificent and realize that that is us, is that we're softening the tension of self-consciousness. We know how tense feeling self-conscious makes us. We understand that tension that keeps us in our heads believing that, for example, everyone's looking at me, everyone's judging me, I'm not good enough in this moment or with these people. We understand and can feel that tension that keeps us believing that this pain or this discomfort or this problem is mine to grapple with alone and mine to grapple with forever. We understand this tension of attachment or of aversion, of clinging to things or running from them. And we can feel it manifesting in our body as all of the discomfortable, uncomfortable emotions feel. Fear and anger and isolation or loneliness or grief. Those have physical ramifications and manifestations in the body. And so if we can soften that self-consciousness, if we can break this veil of illusion, then perhaps we can see ourselves in the stars. There's an Aldous Huxley quote. No, it's a William Blake quote that Aldous Huxley quoted, and I'm not going to remember it right now. And it's not in my notes, but I'll come back to that. I'll get it. I'll get there. However, I can quote to you the Yoga Sutras because I have these phrases in my notes right now. And that is that when we are in this settled state, we can direct this inner light and we can see what is subtle, what is hidden, and what is far away. And from this settled state, we have knowledge of the sun, and then we have knowledge of all the various realms of the universe. From this settled state, we have knowledge of the moon, and then we have knowledge of all the constellations. So the Yoga Sutras, they're really describing these fractals, these things that reflect, that the single reflection reflects the reflection of all. And I love this image of Spinoza shaving down the glass to create these literal fractals, these lenses that could help us see the constellations, and in seeing those constellations to reflect back in and see our own hearts, to see our own inner workings, and eventually to be able to digest the scientific facts that we are the stars, that this stardust of stars that burned out and died billions and billions of years ago are the things that feed the soil and allow plants to grow, that take their energy from the sun, another fellow star, to give us food and to promote life. The Yoga Sutras also say that when upon meditation of the navel center, we can have an understanding of all the bodily systems. I think this is where that phrase navel gazing came from. And that with intuitive perception, everything can be known. We don't have to know it in a literal sense because that's behind the veil of illusion. We can know it on an intuitive sense, unhindered by grasping attachment or fearful aversion. And when we understand that we are part of all things, that if we buy into this notion that we are in and of ourselves divine, then we can also use that same wisdom to discern the difference between things when it matters in the practical realm, between dark and light, between dreams and waking, between what's a real threat and what's just an imaginative or manufactured fear, and the difference between love and attachment. Spinoza said, there is no hope unmingled with fear, and there is no fear unmingled with hope. We are mingled souls, and we, like Walt Whitman said, contain multitudes. The philosopher, astronomer Carl Sagan explains how stars live and die and give us light. The formation of the solar system was triggered by what we think was some supernova explosion, and the sun appeared and its ultraviolet rays poured into our atmosphere, and the resulting light sparked the energy of life, this creation force. And he said, we're just like parasites on these plants, and all of us are solar powered. The sun and its heat live 150 million miles away. That's not an exact number. And yet we see its presence so immediately, right here, right now. We rely on it. So the minute and the magnificent are coexisting. And our awareness of both lets us simultaneously see the differences in things and see the great universal connection between all things. Take some breaths now. Set yourself up for another stretch of time. Imagine that every breath extends the perceived limiting borders of you a little larger, a little taller, wider, deeper. And then with every gentle extension of breath, perhaps inviting it to last a little bit longer on the way in and a little bit longer on the way out. You might feel that tension of self-consciousness ease just a little bit more. And when the inhale turns to an exhale, can you watch those soft, rounded corners turn naturally? No sharp edges between the breath in and the breath out. Can you imagine your skin softening? Can you detect some measure of ease wherever there may be tension inside? Perhaps let the shoulders drop a bit more. Perhaps the belly gets a little softer, more receptive to the breath. Perhaps you give a little more of your weight over to gravity and let the earth really, truly hold you. And perhaps imagining a simple piece of translucent glass. And that even in its translucence, there is a reflection. And it reflects simultaneously inward to magnify all that feels small and separate, and outward to bring into manageable focus what feels too big to grapple with. And it serves as this threshold of connection to replace this veil of illusion. Gently bring your awareness back to this moment, this place, these next few breaths. I found the quote I was looking for. It is Aldous Huxley. It's from Doors of Perception. And he writes, when we feel ourselves to be sole heirs of the universe, when the sea flows in our veins and the stars are our jewels, when all things are perceived as infinite and holy, what motive can we have for covetousness or self-assertion, for the pursuit of power or the drearier forms of pleasure? This is a form of pleasure, to see the stars as our jewels and the sea to be felt flowing in our veins. Thank you so much for joining me. May all beings be happy and free from suffering. May all beings be at peace. Thank you.